good afternoon, and welcome to your lightning talk on the key components of a strong company agreement. My name is Tate. I am the founder and principal attorney at Tate Legal Consultants. We are a boutique law firm based in Dallas, Texas, and we focus on corporate transactions and on real estate deal structuring. So it is my very great pleasure to be here with you today. I appreciate the opportunity to share on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart as a corporate attorney, and that is the company agreement. The company agreement goes by many names. Some folks call it an operating agreement. If it's a corporation, it might be called bylaws. There's lots of different names for it. But essentially, this document is the foundational document for running your company. So what do I mean by that? Why is the company agreement so important? Well, as we're going to discuss today, it's essentially the blueprint for how you're going to run your company, right? So this isn't if you're setting up, say an LLC just to have one, right? But if you've really got a company that you're running, especially if you have partners in that company and you all are working together towards a common goal, this document basically is going to be your guide for how the company is going to be run. So there are a few areas of a company agreement that I think are just really critical to understand before you get into business, right? Before you start actually partnering with folks, actually working together, and especially before you start making money, Critical that you take this particular step to understand and to prepare and negotiate and have a full and robust company agreement. So again, some key components, right? So I think the first we'll start with is shares of the company. So I'm sure you know shares, again, those go by many names, right? It could be called stock, it could be units. I mean, there's a bunch of different names for it, but essentially what it is the membership interests in your company, right? So if you're the founder of the company, or you and your 2 or 3 partners are founders, each of you are going to own shares, right, of that company, or membership interests or units. And so the first question to think about is who owns what, and how do you decide who gets to own what, right? So this can often be a really difficult conversation to have, or a difficult part of the process to work through. I think especially when it comes to folks who put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into a company, what's often referred to as sweat equity, there's a tendency to really value that very highly. And it's understandable. I mean, you're the one who did all the work, right? When you go into these kinds of things. But what you have to understand is the market really tends to value a lot the folks who bring the capital to the company as well, right? So a lot of times when I'm talking to new clients, especially newer business owners or folks that this is maybe their first or second rodeo at this, it takes some time to understand how much you really have to give up sometimes in terms of equity in order to keep your company running. But there's also ways that you can do that. You can take on capital and give up equity or give up profit shares without giving up control, right? So these are the kind of things that you'll want to end up talking about with your corporate attorney. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways to work it. But just understand that money has a really big value when folks are figuring out how much shares they should have of a company. And a lot of times it can be more than you would think it would be based on the fact that all the work comes from the folks who maybe don't necessarily have all the money, right? So that's the first thing that I think it's really important to understand and work out with your partners in your company. From there, I think the next important thing to think about is governance. So your company agreement is going to outline how the company is run, right? So the way I like to think about it is company agreements, in my mind, kind of mirror our legislative bodies, right? So you have got Congress, for example, and Congress will vote on a particular issue, and if they get a majority of folks to agree with them, then maybe this decision happens. If they get a super majority, maybe that's 66% or maybe that's 75%, depending on what the issue is, then that triggers something else, right? So when you go through your company agreement, one great thing you can do is figure out how you're going to vote, right? And who gets to vote on what issues, and how much weight an individual vote carries, right? So that helps you figure out just how decision-making is going to happen amongst the partners in the organization. Another great thing that you can figure out under the governance umbrella is defining the roles of the people involved in the company, right? So this can look a lot of different ways, but for example, whenever I'm involved in a company, I'm definitely more of the language guy, more of the big vision kind of person, and some execution things around that. But I'm not the numbers person. I'm not the numbers person. I'm never going to be the numbers person. I don't want to be the numbers person. Everybody has their individual skill sets. Everybody's got their strengths, and you should play to those strengths, right? So in your company agreement, you can set out who's in charge of what, right? So I might be in charge of A, B, and C, and partner X might be in charge of this, and partner Y might be in charge of that. Now, what's the value in that? Well, now when it comes down to decision making, everybody already knows their roles. Right? And so maybe that even plays out to where, okay, if it's got to do with legal spending, right? Sean, if you're a partner in this business, up to $2,500, you don't have to get our permission for that because we know you know what you're doing. As opposed to every time I need to, go spend, $300 to file a new company, then I have to go get permission from all of the partners. Might take me an extra week to get that permission. Remember that voting process, right? I might have to get all of their signatures or all of their consent in some kind of a document to make that happen. So it can really slow the process down. So giving people specific roles and giving them some latitude to operate within those roles helps make the company just run a lot more smoothly. From there, I think the next most important thing to consider is the money. Right. So money, usually when folks get into a company together, there's a honeymoon phase. Again, just like a personal relationship, there's a honeymoon phase. Everybody's on the same page. Everyone's excited about putting the idea together. What folks usually don't think about is what happens if this works, right? Like what happens if this really works well? I'll give you an example. Say you and I started a company. We started a car wash company, right? And we opened up a couple of car washes and we made so much money. There was $1 million sitting in our account, this company's account. And I say, well, okay, I think I want a new house in the Bahamas. So go on and give me half of that since we're half owners. And then we'll just figure out what to do next. What if you say, well, wait a minute. I thought we were going to open another store. Or even more so, what about the maintenance we need to do on the first 2 stores in order to keep those running? Or what about the promotion that we promised to the manager of all of our stores? How are we going to pay for that, right? So in the section of the company agreement related to the money, which is usually the distributions and allocations section, you can outline how the money can be spent, how much has to be kept for reserves versus how much can actually be distributed to the members. Even further, you can indicate who gets paid first, right? So sometimes, like say if I come in as a pure capital investor, I'm just bringing money to the table, I might want to get paid out first, right? I'm not going to be in the company long term, maybe I am, but I at least want to get my money back so I can see that value is there before we do anything else. Maybe I want to be first up in priority, or maybe I want some interest on my money, which might be referred to as a pref structure, right? So your distribution section helps you to figure out how you're going to spend the money that you make and how much of it you can spend. How great is it to work that out at the beginning, right? Before you get into a long-term thing, before you get to a place where you've made so much money that now it's a problem. How great if you could just look back at that document and say, hey, we already agreed that we're going to set aside X amount of whatever we make to keep the company growing, right? Or, hey, I'm the investor. We already agreed a long time ago. I'm going to get my money back first so I can at least be, made whole, and then everybody else can get paid, right? So these are the things you want to work out before you start making a lot of money. The same thing goes for allocations, right? So allocations is basically a tax accounting concept. So what that means is profits and losses of the company can be allocated to different partners in different ways. Right? And so based on each partner's individual tax situation, it may make sense for one partner to be allocated the losses and another one to be allocated the profits to different degrees. These are the kinds of things that once you have a successful company that's operating well and you're really starting to look at the numbers and crunch them, you may want to be able to tweak those things, right? So that may not be something you're thinking about on day 1, but day 401, when the company's making a bunch of money, you want to be able to manipulate those things to create tax advantages for yourself and for your partners. I'd say the next big issue to consider after we've gone through shares and how those are split up and governance and who's in charge of what and what we do with the money is transfers of interest in the company. So say again, you and I start a company, it's me, you, and our friend Harold, and the 3 of us start a company. Well, what if Harold says, I found this amazing person, Susie, who I think would be a great member of our team, and I think we need to add her to the team. And actually what I want to do is sell her some of my interest in the team so she can be part of the team. So that's what we're going to do. Well, wait a minute, Harold, you didn't really ask us what we thought about that, right? So we need to have a process in place to be able to vote on or to provide consent to new members coming into the entity, as well as members exiting the entity, right? So say Harold decides, I'm just kind of done with this. I don't care if you want to bring Susie on or not, but I'm out. Okay, well, how does that happen, right? I mean, he's not just going to walk away. What about the value in the company? How do you evaluate what the company is worth or Harold's shares in the company? These are all things that you can work out in the company agreement. So you figure that stuff out ahead of time. Then when the issue arises, it's already taken care of. It doesn't slow your business down. It doesn't stop you. It doesn't start an infighting cycle that then leads to the demise of the business. I've seen it happen more times than I care to count. Often as a corporate attorney, I get a call when folks have run into those types of conflicts. And it's great when we can refer back to the company agreement and figure out what we already agreed to. All too often, that's not in place. And it's often the cause of a lot of strife and a lot of stress in the way companies operate. So again, you're going to look at, when it comes to transfers of interest, you're going to look at who can consent and under what circumstances to transfers of interest. What happens if someone wants to leave the company altogether? And then, we also have to look at worst case scenarios. What happens if someone passes away? What happens if someone becomes mentally incapacitated? What if you have a member who's married and then they get divorced? Well, what happens to their interest then? If it's in Texas and it's a community property state, does that person's spouse now own 50% of that person's share of the company? If so, what about governance rights at that point, right? So these are all real life things that happen, for better or for worse. They happen to all of us, in one way or the other. And, the extent to which we can be prepared for how to address those issues ahead of time, the better off the company will be, right? And all of that stuff is handled in the company agreement. Another thing that I think is great about a company agreement is it just allows you to really go big picture and think about what it is you all are trying to accomplish together, and really make sure that the partners are all on the same page, right? So when you start looking at shares, start looking at governance, start looking at how the money's going to be split, how tax stuff is going to be allocated, and then how shares are going to be transferred either internally or externally, it really makes you look at the big picture of the company and what you're trying to accomplish. And that can be so important because sometimes folks can think they're on the same page and it turns out they're not. I'll provide a quick example. I had one client who, there were a couple of members of this company, and one was in charge of buying all these homes, going and sourcing a bunch of homes and multifamily properties, and the other was in charge of managing them. And so we got on a call to do our consultation on setting up their company agreement because they hadn't done it. Well, we get into the conversation and one of the partners says, so it's just like, Shirley and I talked about, when I'm, kind of get to a point 3 years from now or so, when we've reached a certain point in the business, I'm going to go ahead and leave the business to Shirley. And then Shirley turned to the other partner and said, wait, Tom, no, I think you got it backwards. So no, what he meant to say was, I am going to be leaving after 3 years and giving the business to him. They both thought the other person was going to inherit the business from the other one. And hand to God, they never would have known it, had we not gone through and done all of the work of unpacking their company agreement and thinking about all these different issues. So something absolutely foundational, absolutely fundamental to the way that company was run would have blown up in their faces 2 or 3 years down the line had they not engaged in the process of really understanding what was in their company agreement. So, in conclusion, as we've discussed, there are several key components to a strong company agreement. One has to do with shares and how shares are going to be split. Another is how you're going to govern the entity in the most efficient manner possible. Another is what you're going to do with the money once it starts working. We all want a successful business, so once that starts happening, what do you do with the money? And finally, how do you transfer interests in the business? So there's a lot of important aspects to it, and the company agreement is your chance to set the ground rules from day one to have a long and fruitful business relationship with your partners, and hopefully a very successful and profitable business. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions for me as a corporate attorney, feel free to reach out. We'll make sure we leave our contact information with you. Everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks.